What if a dying woman returns one last time, just long enough to say goodbye? What if a former hitman's sins finally catch up to him? And what if the morgue you work in isn't just filled with bodies, but with something far worse? These aren't just ghost tales. They're real encounters, as recounted by nurses on Quora. Terrifying, unexplained, and waiting for you to step inside. But before we get into these stories, if you like dark and spine-chilling stories inspired by true events or real places narrated against the soothing sound of a crackling fireplace, subscribe to help out a brother. Story 1. She came back to say goodbye. I've worked as a charge nurse in a nursing home for over a decade, and I've seen my fair share of death. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night. It was just past midnight, the halls dimly lit, the usual hum of distant televisions and muffled coughs filling the air. I was making my rounds, checking on residents, when I saw her. Mrs. Henderson lying in her bed, the sheets neatly tucked around her frail body. I blinked, confused. Mrs. Henderson had been hospitalized for over a week with pneumonia. The doctors didn't expect her to make it much longer. "Mrs. Henderson?" I whispered, stepping closer. "You're back?" She turned her head slightly, her milky eyes locking onto mine. She didn't speak, but her lips curled into the faintest smile. A chill slithered down my spine. Something was wrong. I backed out of the room and nearly collided with Janice, one of the CNAs, certified nursing assistant. "Janice," I said, my voice tight, "when did Mrs. Henderson get discharged?" Janice frowned. "What? She's still at the hospital." "No, she's right there." I pointed into the room. Janice peered inside, then looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "There's no one in there." I shoved past her, my pulse hammering. The bed was empty. Perfectly made, no wrinkles, no indentation, as if no one had been there at all. Janice touched my shoulder. "You okay?" I swallowed hard. I saw her. We stood there in silence, the air suddenly too thick, too cold. 3 hours later, the hospital called. Mrs. Henderson had passed away. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the same time I'd seen her lying in that bed. She hadn't come back to stay. She'd come back to say goodbye. Story 2. Dragged to Hell. My friend was a nurse at a nursing home, and she told me this story, one that still makes my skin crawl. She had a patient, Tony, an 80-something-year-old man with a past darker than the grave. Rumor was, he'd been a hitman for one of the most notorious crime families in the city. Spent decades in prison before being paroled as a broken old man. That night, she was helping another resident when she heard it. A scream. Not just any scream. A raw, guttural wail of pure terror. She and the resident both froze. Then, from the hallway, came the sound of dragging, slow, deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across the linoleum. She rushed to the door and looked out. Her blood turned to ice. Tony, her Tony, was being dragged down the hallway by two figures dressed in black. Not nurses. Not orderlies. These things were wrong. Tall, impossibly thin. Their movements too smooth, too unnatural. Tony's face was twisted in agony, his fingers clawing at the floor, his mouth open in a silent scream. The resident beside her whimpered. "Oh God! Oh God!" She bolted into the hallway. "Hey!" The figure stopped, turned, and then they vanished, along with Tony. The hallway was empty. The exit door at the end, still locked. The alarm undisturbed. She sprinted to Sam's room, her heart in her throat. He was there, in his bed, dead. His face was peaceful, his body untouched. But his sheets, they were damp with sweat. Two other residents swore they'd seen the same thing, black-clad figures dragging Tony toward the locked door. A door that led outside, or maybe below. Story 3. The things that walk the morgue. Working in the morgue changes you. The silence, the cold, the way the dead watch you. But the worst part, the ones who aren't on the table. The first time I saw her, I thought I was hallucinating. A beautiful woman, standing near the cabinets, her dark hair pinned back in an old-fashioned style. She smiled at me. A slow, knowing smile, then turned and walked through the wall. I dropped my clipboard. Then I heard it. A soft, feminine chuckle. I wasn't alone. The mortician who worked here before me told me stories. Said the woman was a former employee, one who never left. But she wasn't the only one. There was the couple, an older man and woman holding hands. They'd nod as they passed, then fade into nothing. And then, the girls. I never saw them, but I heard them, giggling, every damn night. High-pitched, childlike laughter, echoing down the corridors. If I followed it, the sound would shift, moving just out of sight. Then, the patter of small feet running. One night, I snapped. I chased the sound, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The giggling grew louder, more frantic. Then, silence. I stood there, breathing hard, when I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck. And a whisper, "You're it." I quit the next day, but in my mind, sometimes I can still hear them. Giggling, running, playing. Did you like those stories? Bet you won't walk down a hospital's hallway at nighttime the same way again. These are fictionalized accounts, based on true stories as told by nurses.